Hi, I'm Bill Fawcett, moderating a panel on the art and craft of writing humor for LibertyCon 2021. Hi, Brandy. Welcome to our panel, and we have three distinguished humorous writers on it who will be explaining all of the nuances and all of the techniques and everything you need to become a successful stand-up comedian or comedy writer. Good luck, ladies. So,
you are funny.
That's all the humor I get to do as moderator. So we'll begin with some introductions. Could you tell us who you are, what you write about, a little about humor in your books? Jody Nye, can you start?
Hi there, I'm Jody Lynn Nye, and the gentleman who just introduced me is my husband. So he's bound to he's bound by law and by the powers vested in by the state of Illinois to find me humorous. I write science fiction and fantasy, most of it with a humorous bent, and I have been in later years also adopted the Myth Adventure series begun by Robert Asprin, written by the two of us, and then taken over by me, and Bob's Dragons series as well. So I have perpetrated humor in a number of places, including things that I didn't originate but have embraced with both arms.
Karen Bogen?
I'm Karen Bogen, and I write under KB Bogen, because you won't find me under Karen. And I mostly write humorous fantasy, although I occasionally branch out. My most recent book is a humorous science fantasy detective horror story. And I like to find humor in everyday situations and then kind of twist it around a little.
What kind of book was that? I want to hear it again.
It's a humorous science fantasy detective horror story.
I thought I heard that.
You've read it.
Several shelves at the library. Very good. Got to see what that is. And Patricia Briggs, please.
Hi, I'm Patricia Briggs. I write urban fantasy, and I don't write books that are humorous, but I have a lot of humor in my books. I do a lot of MASH-like humor. When things get really dark and terrible, people make black humor jokes and that kind of thing. And to me, it's a really important part of writing the kind of works I do, because it adds, well, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but it adds to the book.
Yes, Patricia has where was the chuckle.
Yes.
All right, let us begin with some definitions, or rather, everyone has their own opinion of what's funny. What makes a book or a story humorous, or what can be the elements? And I know more than one answer to this. There's a lot. So each of you, but what are some of the elements that will make a book arouse a feeling of humor in the reader? Same order then, Jody?
Well, in many cases, what makes a good humorous story is either a funny person in an ordinary setting or an ordinary person in a humorous setting. If you try to build a humorous person into a humorous setting, you frequently get that kind of screech when you have a microphone too close to the speaker. It's overkill. You want to tell a story about something that matters to the main character, or to the people around him or her, but it has to be something that actually matters, as opposed to just a throwaway. Because if you're just going to tell a joke, you're not going to write a book. The essence of writing a humorous story is the long, slow build, along with, in the same way that you would formulate a book, that it would have growth of the energy of a story in a story arc with various resolutions. The same thing would go for a humorous story. You would have the funny arc of the story, but you would also have places where you would put in a punchline, add a humorous element, subtract a humorous element, but all the time telling a good story, because it's vital to have that at the back of it. Without that, people will walk away and say, I laughed, but I'm never going to read it again.
Thank you. Karen, what makes people laugh in your books?
I like to take an everyday situation and kind of twist it 90 degrees. Like have a throne room scene where the king is on the throne and everybody's speaking forsoothly, and have the main character come in and start speaking in normal American English. I like to take words and turn them into jokes, like everything works in theory, or the next one, which is you can't get there from here. And just what kind of ways can you change a phrase and make it different?
Could you give us an example?
An example, well, I'll jump forward to you can't get there from here. Well, you can't get there from here because there's one more letter in there than there isn't here, unless you add the word T to it, and then you've gotten there from here.
Okay.
Okay.
He said painfully seeing it, but not accepting yet. Patricia.
Here, allow me to add one to it. The late Dorothy Parker, who was a notable wit, said, "Brevity is the soul of lingerie."
Makes sense.
Steal it later. Patricia,
Yeah.
urban fantasy and humor.
So fantasy and humor. So I don't write, as I said, I don't write specifically humorous fantasy because that's its own genre. And I will say right here, I think it is really the most difficult genre to write in. To write, well, humor itself is the most difficult thing to do. And I found that when I was doing drama, when I was in high school. And the serious stuff is what I was really impressed with before I started acting myself. And when I got in and got on the stage, I realized the serious things we did, oh my goodness, the one about the Salem witch trials.
The Crucible?
Crucible, thank you. We did the Crucible. And the Crucible is a really powerful piece. And it was really fun, and it was, quite frankly, really easy to do. And then we did a humorous farce called See How They Run, which is like a World War II era humorous farce. So I don't know how many of you have seen it, but it was much more difficult. It was more difficult the timing was more difficult. You had to get it just right, or the lines that were supposed to be funny wouldn't be funny. And you had to get the intonation just right. And it was a lot harder. And writing it too, I will say that the serious scenes, the big, powerful scenes that I've written in my books, the ones that people think that are really hard to write, usually are the easiest for me. The hardest for me are things where I know the scene there's something funny about this interchange. I know that there's a joke waiting back here, that there's some way to twist and turn these people, what these people are saying back and forth, into something that is just slapstick funny, and I can't find it. And it will take me sometimes weeks. And I've been known to take a scene out of a book because I couldn't find that piece of humor that I knew was lurking there, and it was going to bother me. So I took it out just because I didn't want it lurking anymore.
And then lies the problem. I've been on a panel several times, which was basically, why aren't humor writers taken seriously? And I maintain that the reason humor writers aren't taken seriously is because good humor has to appear effortless.
Yes.
And if it was easy to read, it must have been easy to write.
Oh no. Oh no.
So to go to a little more to specifics, and we'll reverse the order. Patricia, tell us of a scene and how you entered humor into it. Can you give us an example of one you can pull out of memory, or is that asking too much with so many bestsellers?
So this actually, I'm just going to go back to a book called Dragon Bones, which is not one of the Mercy books. This is straight traditional fantasy. And for me, sometimes humor, some of my favorite ways of bringing humor into a piece is when the readers and I and the main character all share a secret that nobody else knows. So in Dragon Bones, the main character is Ward of Hurog, and he is a big guy. He's not bad looking, but he talks slowly. He's got a aphasia going, so he can't speak quickly. And he's been living a lie for most of his life that he's stupid. And we know, because it's told in first person, as readers and writer, we know he's smart. but nobody else does. And this is a horse situation. The stallion has gotten out with the mares, and people have been chasing them for hours trying to catch them. And he walks out with a bucket of grain, and he goes and he grabs the mare, and he walks back and he looks his uncle in the face, and he and you and I all knowing that he is. Sorry, we had somebody knock on the door. Just a minute. Timing is perfect.
All timing.
Right? Humorous timing.
Don't let him step on your punchline.
We all know that he's smart, but we know that his uncle thinks he's stupid, and he looks at his uncle in the face and he says, "You have to be smarter than the horse." And you know that he knows that his uncle doesn't think he's smarter than the horse. And that's where the punchline of that scene gets. And I know this, having interrupted and also talking about it verbally, it doesn't hit as well. But in the story, it hits pretty. It's timed well, because there's this kind of a da-dump feeling to that scene that I really enjoy. So,
Karen, do you build or spring your humor?
Do I build or what?
Do you prefer to build up a humor over a large arc, or do you like to spring the joke on your reader? The phrasing or the thing?
A little of both. It just really depends on what the joke is. Sometimes, let me give you an example. In the first Quest book, Go Quest Young Men, the main character, Erwin, is sitting by his campfire, and he's in a forest, and he hears this crashing in the underbrush, and he's worried that it's like some kind of wild animal or something. And then all of a sudden, this old man in full rusted plate armor crashes into the firelight, swinging a sword, sort of missing Erwin by feet. And Erwin finally gets him to stop, and the old man says, "Art not that foul, fire-breathing, dragon-eating, maiden-eating dragon I've been chasing these past few years?" Or these past 20 years? And Erwin says, "Nope, sorry, I'm a little bit shy of 20, and I may be a little foul, but I've never had a chance to eat a maiden yet."
Okay.
There's a build up to that, and then I drop it. So, drop the joke. So it's kind of both.
Okay.
And I didn't tell it very well.
Jody, the humor in some of your books varies from various types, as your editor. And when you're looking at a myth book, what is the presentation? What makes the myth books humorous? The Myth Adventure series.
There are so many things. When Robert Asprin created the Myth Adventure series, he built so much into it that I am still mining out the nuances. It starts with terrible puns. The name of the first book is Another Fine Myth, which is a take on Laurel and Hardy's Another Fine Mess You've Gotten Me Into. And indeed, the characters are getting themselves into a mess. It puts an apprentice magician who doesn't know what he's doing into partnership with a master magician who had his powers taken away as a practical joke by his old friend who was just shot dead by a couple of imp assassins outside the window. And if that's not enough, it is full of terrible puns. And Bob put a humorous quotation at the head of every chapter that features that apprentice magician. So there was a lot there, but he built upon the terrible puns in really wonderful ways. That Blut, all of the dimensions have punning names. So where the action takes place is most of it takes place in Deva, which is where Devils come from, and the apprentice magician, whose name is Skeeve and shall heretofore be named Skeeve, accuses his newfound mentor, friend, and partner of being a devil when he's corrected, because Oz is in fact from the dimension of perv. And if you like them, they are pervects. And if you don't like them, they are perverts. And so the building is there. So the naming of characters, the naming of locations is very important to the humor involved. In one of the last books that Bob and I did together, Myth-Gotten Gains, they are in pursuit of the Golden Hoard, which is in this case Hoard, because we're talking about animate and intelligent magical items instead of people on horseback. And the magical sword, which is in fact a genuine magical sword, is named Ursat's. And all of the copies that came afterwards came to be known as Ursat swords, but they aren't in fact the genuine Ursats. But because he is a magical sword, he was built for war. When Oz, who has found him, is trying very hard to get out of a situation, Ursat's is yelling challenges. Oz is trying to de-escalate the situation, and Ursat's is yelling, kill them, cut their throats, cut their heads off. So the dichotomy of a not terribly peaceful person who wants to get out of this in one piece has a talkative sword he cannot shut up. So the fun of that is the juxtaposition of the sword is only doing what he was built to do. And the conniving, sometimes grifting, but otherwise actually quite a good person is trying to get out of there with his skin whole. So there's lots going on in that. The characters are wonderful. They are very real. Some of them have tragic backstories. Some of them have harsh realities. But they are real people in absurd situations. And I think that's what people like about them.
It seems to be a common thread that do you need reality for humor? Do you need pathos for humor?
It helps, just like in adding humorous scenes to a dramatic story, it helps for the texture of it to add dramatic scenes to a humorous story.
Patricia, what tells you to put a humor line in? When do you need that light scene in your book? Is there a build to it? Is there a kind of, you put these in because of X, or does it just happen when it inspires you?
Yes, to all of the above. So sometimes it just comes from the scene that you're writing, the interplay between the characters. And I have some characters that tend to be a little funnier than others. I have a foul-mouthed computer whiz, Ben, who's British, Ben, who for the most of the first couple books, there was some question about whether he was also a rapist and murderer. So he is quick, and he makes awful comments using foul language, and is just kind of a really good character to base humor around. And sometimes it's, the interpersonal relationships between the various, in my books, they're werewolves. In other books, they're, just partners in crime, that kind of thing. But sometimes, especially when I'm writing the urban fantasy, where some of it gets really, really dark, some places it's really necessary to give readers respite. You've taken them really dark places. You've done terrible things to people they care about. Hopefully, if I've done my job right, they care about those people. And I need to give them something that makes them feel good, or gives them a respite. And sometimes, and some of those I set up. I'm trying to remember which book it was, but there was a book where the beginning of it, Mercy and her husband are running around. He's chasing her. She's pretending to run away from him. And the topic comes up that when you want a little time in the sack, you just have to give a little nudge. So throughout that book and the next 2 or 3 books, when things get really dark and things get kind of awful and stuff, then I have Mercy go nudge, and it breaks that up, and that's a planned thing. And so it's all of writing is a matter of feel. And I mean, that's why my favorite thing to do is editing. That's my favorite place to be, because it's in the editing process that I can polish those jokes or get rid of the stupid ones, and the first rule of humor is you can't laugh at your own jokes when you're writing. I mean, if you're on stage, you can do it a bit, but if you're writing, you have to be really kind of low key about that, or the joke will fall flat. Because it removes that that barrier between. It points out that there's an author writing these books instead of just the readers going on an adventure. So you want to be careful to make sure that the humor has a basis in the characters and the people and the situation that you're writing about. And it's not a wink, wink, nod, nod from me, the writer, to you, the reader. I'm thinking of a really well-known, if you've read this book, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And I don't want to bring up author's name, so I won't do it. But there's a well-known series that is sort of a retelling of Horatio Hornblower, the Revolutionary War in France. But it's science fiction and it's awesome and I really love it. And I got to the point where the bad guy comes out and the bad guy's name is Rob Espierre. And I threw the book across the room. I was so mad because we all knew that it was based on the French Revolution. But by doing that, then the author brought himself into that book and said, hey, look how clever I am. And it made me crazy. Absolutely crazy, because I love that book so much that it reminded me I'm reading a book. It reminded me that there's an author behind it, and it was something that did not make sense in the context of a story. That's too much of a coincidence for the story to work. So and because it was a recurring character, every time he walked on for the next 2 or 3 or 4 books, however many books it was, it made me mad as a reader. So you have to be careful with your humor and make sure that it comes out of the story.
Yeah, he's there for the next 5 books, so they finally stop and have to take on the Empire and the Earth Empire instead.
Yes.
So
yes.
What?
So it bother you too, Bill?
I know the author, so I expected it.
Okay, well, I do too, and I think he's amazing. But that particular, and usually he's right on. I mean, I have to say this. Usually he gets it right.
He was working hard to signal who that was about in case you didn't catch it.
Right, but anybody who knows the French Revolution knows darn good and well who it is. So anyway, okay.
Since I've just finished and turned in a book to Tony that's to an editor, which is a modern version of the Mongol conquest of the known world. And my character's hero's name is Timo Sheen, because his father was Irish, as in Timoshin.
Oh, wow.
His real name. Okay, I don't think I can agree with you on that, but anyhow.
I think that is different.
Karen, how do you keep your humor, some of which is leg-pullingly painful, from taking your reader out of your story? How do you keep them from leaving the story? How do you handle the humor so it doesn't do that?
The humor is the story, and the story is the humor. So it's really kind of hard to separate them.
Says a lady with 4 puns a page.
Basically, I happen to think that life is funny, and it's my job to make sure everybody knows that. And so it doesn't really seem to happen to me so much. And of course, most of what I write is like nonstop humor. It's not like what Patricia does, where it's serious with some humor. What I've published anyway started out with a joke, and I just made it a book length. So I don't think I can actually manage to answer your question.
Okay. Dr. Aspinall would appreciate your definition of it started as a joke and became a book. He always loved Shaggy Dog stories, and some of his books started as Shaggy Dog stories. So it does not a surprise. Let's talk about types of humor. What works in books and what kind of humor doesn't work in books for you? Because I've seen books that have types of humor I'm not always comfortable with. What kinds of things? What is a type of humor that works for you and a type of humor that you wouldn't put in one of your books? And we'll give Karen a start on this one since we've been putting her last.
You talking to me?
Yep.
I think, well, like I said before, humor should be effortless. And I have read some books that claim to be humor where it was like the writer was going, I need to stick a joke in right here. And it's a joke, but it seems like it's forced. And I don't know if any of you have ever done stand-up comedy. The problem with writing a humor book is you don't get that instant response like you would doing stand-up comedy. And so you have to really, you have to get that pacing just right. And I really, really don't like it when I start to trip over a joke. Does that make sense? You understand trip over a joke? It's like, you're reading along and all of a sudden there's a joke there and it's just doesn't belong. And that's drives me nuts. And I'm going off on a tangent again, aren't I?
No, you can't do that on a panel.
I do that
I want to
Right,
hear
you
you talk.
tangent.
You're just fine, Karen.
Okay,
Patricia,
good.
is there types of humor, comments your characters can't make in your books that won't work? Is there something you avoid when you're working up a situation?
Sure. I tend to avoid racist humor, and even when it's appropriate for the characters. So for instance, I have Native American characters, and I have friends who are Native American, and they tell the best racist jokes, let me tell you. They're not racist because they're the minority, but let's say they are jokes that turn on racism. Things like why has Rapid
Let's
City—
not do good examples of them on live.
Okay. Well, this is okay. Well, stop. That's a good. Thank you. Good catch. So I have friends who tell really good jokes that I can't tell. So I avoid any kind of racist jokes if I can. Things that are difficult for me are things like physical comedy is hard when you're writing, because it depends on a visual aspect, and I have to clarify my writing quite a bit because I depend on readers to fill in a lot of the physical things that are going on. I give them hints and clues and then figure that they're going to see the character pacing around. I don't have to tell them 50 times that he's stepping over a book in the middle of this, in the middle of the room, that kind of thing. So physical comedy is, for me as a writer, much harder to write. Even if it's appropriate for the time. In fact, I'm working on a scene right now with some physical comedy in it, and I've had to revise it a lot more than I would if it had been just a battle scene where people die and get their heads ripped off. So,
that.
right, and the kind of humor that I really find easy, and that just comes because that's the way I write and that's the way I think, is the verbal humor. When people make snide comments and those quick comebacks and stuff. I can't do it. I can't really do it in real life because I need a week or two to think about it. But it is something, when I'm writing the scene, it comes to me quite easily.
Jody, what type of humor can't you put in any of your books? The Imperium, whatever. Is there a type of humor you avoid?
Oh, absolutely. To add to Patty's statement about racist humor is anywhere where you are punching down, where somebody is unable to defend themselves. Jay Leno said about doing stand-up that if you see someone in the front row, a bald man, he won't make fun of the fact that he has no hair, but he'll make fun of his tie, because that was a choice that the man made to wear an appalling tie. So he feels safe about doing that. You cannot easily make fun of somebody for who they are and have your audience go along with you. But you can make fun of them for their choices, which is often the elements that make up a situation comedy. I don't like
small-minded humor. So it's humor that makes people small. The person who's making the comment small.
Mhm.
And you can do that if they're the bad guy or their side character who is that kind of a person, as long as it's clear that it's the character making that comment and not that there is disapproval from whoever's viewpoint you're seeing it through.
It needs to be part of that character that he makes comments like that. But that's not necessarily the funny part of the story.
Yes.
There's
You're not expecting, you don't want your readers to laugh at it.
No, because you shouldn't be intending to have your characters laugh at that. I also find the breaking the fourth wall humor to be very difficult unless you have incorporated that from the beginning. Because if you're halfway through a book and for the first time the main character turns to the reader and said, "Did you see that one coming? I didn't see that coming," it takes me right out of the story. But if you have implied from the beginning that sort of thing can happen, and if that's the moment where it does, you'll probably get a ha out of them, if not a downright chuckle. So foreshadowing, just like in drama, helps you to get something, get away with something that you might not otherwise have been able to do it.
Karen, you had a comment?
On the subject of things that I don't like in humor, the same thing I don't like in a lot of writing, she just reminded me of something, is that, one of the problems I've run into a few times reading other people's humor is it's not really so much the wink, wink, nudge, nudge, but you get the feeling that the person is telling a joke and you haven't heard the rest of it, or they've left part of it out, or they told it to somebody, but then they put it in the book and they didn't put the whole thing in there.
Context. What you're talking about is forming the context.
The problem is I can't give you any examples, because when I run into something like that, I stop reading it. I will not look at it again. And it just, if the humor doesn't flow from the story, it shouldn't be there. So that's a real pet. That's really, it just really ticks me off when that happens.
Maybe like an
Or
in
when you get a copy editor who has no sense of humor.
Like an in joke. If I read young adult, there are some young adult in jokes. So I'm reading some K-pop books, and there are some in jokes in there that I don't get. And I don't think it's bad on the writer's part, but I do think that they need maybe keep an eye on and remember that there are people who are reading them who maybe are just starting in the K-pop world, like I am. Or and there's things like the Tower of Darkness, those little the D&D movies that have been going around at science fiction conventions for the last, 10 years, that are awesome, but they're based on one giant in joke. If you don't play D&D and don't know people who play D&D, they're about half as funny as they are if you do. And I think that keeping your audience in mind when you're writing a story when you're writing humor, I think is also important.
Again, context is important. And if what you're talking about cannot be comprehended by an age group or a social group, a little bit of filling it in context would help. But then again, you shouldn't have to fill in the blanks for the people who came in later. They'll get it eventually. There are going to be genres that are written for the people who are fans of that kind of thing. And as some of my friends have said, I'm not here to educate you. So fair enough. Fair enough. I'll ask somebody who belongs to, say, the teeny bopper era, or one of my friends who has already been converted to, say, to BTS, and say, what does this mean? Did I miss it? And if it proves that no, indeed, this is not something about K-pop bands, it's just something that the author threw in, that's a fault.
Yes.
It should be something that is for the reader. Everything that you put on paper into a book, you put there on purpose. So put it there so that it will be enjoyed by the greatest number of people who like that sort of thing.
I think another thing you have to be careful with, and I do use this all the time, but you have to be a little careful of pop humor based on pop culture. So I've got a lot of Doctor Who references and things like that, but I think that's classic enough that I'm comfortable using it. But I've got some things in some of my books that I wouldn't do now. I talk about a Gibbs slack because of NCIS.
Oh, yeah.
But I really don't assume, right, that people are watching that anymore. I know it's still on. I know it's still good. But it's not, it's not what's on right now. And then there's some genre.
Last week, you're safe.
Yeah, right. But you don't want to date your work either. So getting something that's fairly classical, like the Princess Bride, or classically nerdy. How's that? Like Princess Bride, Star Wars, Star Trek, Doctor Who, that kind of stuff, even Supernatural. Those kinds of things are fairly and depending on how you use them, some of the movies, like I used the Queen of the Damned for one of them. Those are fairly safe. But if you're trying to use something that is ephemeral, it might work really well for when your book comes out in a year or 6 months. But 10 years down the road, if it's still in print, you're looking at that and you have what I call the Highlander series, the Highlander syndrome. So Highlander, the TV series, when it came out, oh, those many moons ago, he was pretty techie and he was pretty, right on the edge, cutting edge of stuff. And he walks out with his laptop and it weighs like 50 pounds. It's in a big suitcase. It weighs like 50 pounds. And when he did that originally, nobody had laptops. It's like, oh, that's so cool. And his car has a phone and the cell phone is like this big, right? Yep. And now you look at it and it makes you laugh. And it was supposed to make this character kind of cutting edge and really trendy for somebody who's like 500 years old or however many years he is. And now it kind of has the opposite effect. So when you're writing, because we all hope our books stay in print for a long time, or in the case of new writers who may actually sell the book they're writing today 10 years from now. I have a book that I wrote and didn't come out until 6 or 7 years after I wrote it. And for those kinds of things, you have to be really careful what kind of humor you use and make sure it's timeless humor, that it's not a product of this moment in history.
Well,
That's why archetypes work so well, because everybody knows a lazy slob, everybody knows an overprotective parent, everybody knows a braggart. Those are timeless. But if you're talking about someone who is living in his mother's basement and programming, that may continue on as an archetype through time, and it may not. So you want to stay as classic as possible, to stay as relevant as possible.
Karen?
What?
The question. This is leading to a new question. In fact, Patricia actually usurped my next question.
I'm sorry.
No, it's perfect. Which is advice to an author who, especially a new author who wants to insert some humor in a scene or element. What advice would you give them? Patricia has told us to make it not timely, but classic. Karen, what would you advise an author who asked you, how can I put something light in this scene? I just strangled half the human race.
I would tell them to, if they want to, it depends on the audience. That's the first thing, is it depends on the audience. If I was going to try and make something funny out of just having strangled somebody, I would make some comment about the look on the guy's face and the strange shade of purple. But again, it's all terribly subjective, and that's the kind of thing I would do.
Well, if another writer was trying to put, another writer was trying to put in a scene, no matter what it is, what would you tell them to think about when they're writing that humor into the scene?
Well, start out with, are you the only one that would think it's funny? Do you think that your friends or your parents or their parents or your parents' friends would find it funny? Who are you targeting it to? I mean, you don't want to write humor that's very, very, very American if your audience is British or Chinese or Japanese. So you want to make sure that it's relevant to your audience. Don't get too tied down in the details. Keep it fluffy, because humor is fluffy, as we all know. Although somebody once asked me, somebody once said that the one subject you couldn't use to write humorously was murdering babies. And the first thing that popped into my head was a humorous scene of murdering a baby. And I don't like that sort of thing. But because they said it couldn't be done, my brain had to do it.
Luckily they didn't tell Pratchett he'd have made a whole book.
No, he would not.
Not Terry, no. Jody, you teach the writer's workshop at the intensive writer workshop at Dragon Con, and you do have a section on humor. Mm-hmm. What is the advice you give to your new writers in this there on putting humor, writing humor?
There are some people that are simply not funny, and they're going to try anyway. I think of the character Puddleglum from the Chronicles of Narnia, who was trying to prove how funny he was, and he cut a most mournful caper, as the narrator said. But for the others, I say, commit to the joke. If you're going to put this character into this situation, you're going to go all the way on it. You're going to explain why this character's in this situation and what he needs to do to get out of it. Treat it like a dramatic story, but keep your sentences short and punchy. if there is something to add as a comparison that will make it more humorous, by all means do so. And remember that you are there to entertain, not horrify. So, and again, your audience is very important to that. Military humor is very, very dark because it comes out of a dark place. It's trying to lighten an intolerable situation of you're being shot at and you're being shouted at by people with very short haircuts for no good reason except that you volunteered to be there. And in past generations, you didn't volunteer to be there, but you had to go anyway. So the humor is extremely dark. But for any other story, make them want to be there. Give them a reward for sticking with your joke. Give them a wish fulfillment if necessary, something that was worth sitting through your build-up to get to your punchline. So build the energy, boom, explosion. And if that explosion is not there, if that payoff is not there, your humor probably isn't going to be successful.
Okay.
So you want to reward patience with energy.
That's just like a battle scene at the end of the book. It build up to the battle. It better well be a good battle scene, not and then they had a fight and won. Humor works the same way.
Or as you would say, the ideal movie is all car chases and explosions.
Well, there's some nudity and sex, but other than that, I mean, it's modern now. But I'll settle for car chases and explosions, of course. It reads like my books. I'm going to mention now, of course, a yes or no answer with why you think it. Puns are the highest form of humor. Can you work a pun in? Do you work puns into the humor in your release, Patricia?
Not unless it's verbal, not unless it's people themselves being punny. So because I think puns, if you're going to use puns in your writing, like from the narrator voice, the book has to be basically have a humorous vein, which mine do not. But for characters, sure. Like, and I have a couple of friends of mine who can't talk to you for 5 minutes without bringing a pun in it. They're the funniest. Both of them are just the funniest people on the planet, and both of them were married to people with no sense of humor. I don't understand it. None whatsoever. And my favorite joke that this friend of mine makes is earth, air. Let's see, earth, air, fire. Surprise! Nobody expects the element of surprise. So anyway, I didn't do it right. See, I'm not a very good humorist verbally. I don't catch that really well, very fast. But yeah, no, I think puns are very difficult to come up with new ones. And I think that they work fine for my characters verbally when they're sparring back and forth, and that's just fine. But as in my narrative voice, I don't use them.
Karen, you work puns in on a bunch of levels. Talk about some of the ways you use puns.
Well, it depends on the book. In the Quest series, all of the puns are in the titles. Go Quest, Young Man, Quest and Found. The third book is Shortly Your Quest. I'm working on that one. But in Everything Works in Theory, I take the title and I try to twist it different ways. And then I have the whole book is 3 different sections. Everything Works in Theory, No Way in Hell, and It's a Free Country. And I take those sayings and I twist the meanings of the sayings. So It's a Free Country is about a country that's literally coming loose from the planet.
Okay. I think that qualifies as a pun, Karen.
Yes, it does. So that whole book is different ways of doing plays on words. But the Quest series, the only puns are the titles.
Okay. Jody, you have been known to commit an unfortunate pun or two, including one.
The term you're looking for is puntification.
Oh, absolutely. I consider myself punctilious on occasion, but there are times I can't say that it's the highest form of humor. It requires not only a leap of linguistic tongue twisting, but it also requires your audience to understand the source material that it's based on.
Yes.
And sometimes that doesn't work out. So I think it is a high form of humor because it requires some wit to get it and some wit to construct it. But there are constructing a good, funny story, I think, that successfully makes the audience laugh and still tells a good story at the same time is the better use of humor.
But every time I start one of those long, shaggy dog stories, you stop me.
Your dogs all have fleas, baby.
I think
They are old.
But
Stole them all from Asimov.
I love wordplay. I love a story. The good stories all have a twist in the tail of sorts, like Dorothy Parker's quip, and it's the unexpected, like Karen's Free Country, that make people say, "Oh yes, I really enjoy that. That's funny. Let me know more. I want to know more."
Since
And the
we're
longer
talking,
that you can keep somebody in your milieu, then the more successful you can be as a humorist.
I think that's absolutely true. I think that, and I think I may have said this earlier, because this is a writer track panel, I believe, right?
Yes.
One of the things I want to emphasize is that all stories are about people. One of the best humorists out there, and I'm going to lose his name, he wrote sporting humor. And help. Poof, no eyebrows is one of his stories. But he talks about being a young boy, and it's just like daily life kind of humor, and they're absolutely hilarious. But the reason that they work is because he's the main character in all of his stories. And I'm going to shut up here for just a minute, let somebody else talk, and I'm going to go use my brain and figure out who it is. He just passed away here a couple of years ago. So.
Okay. Well, we are moving on here. So I think at this point we've got some experts, and one of the things I would like to ask, I'm going to ask two questions. The first one of which is, if someone says, I want to learn to write humor, what book should I read that's humorous that I should copy, or that will teach me or show me how to use humor or what humor is? What book would you recommend to them? Jody?
Wow. I would have to say that I would put the works of Robert Asprin and Terry Pratchett into the hands of anybody who wants to understand good humor, because they are about great characters in situations that we would otherwise consider to be absurd, but they're great stories on top of that, but very, very funny. And still, Terry Pratchett holds the record for making me cry with a single word, but I also laughed hysterically at so many of his built up and then produced jokes. So I would say those are really good things to look at. The Writings of a Lady that is probably not much thought of today, but should be, is Irma Bombeck, that my mother used to read when I was a kid, and then I started reading her things, because they are trenchant and extremely funny commentary on just ordinary suburban life. When she talks about the young bride who was out waxing her driveway, I just love that sort of thing, because it's one of the things about humor that's so great is exaggeration. And while young brides throw themselves into what they think of as domestic bliss, that one is going above and beyond. So
it doesn't last long.
reading those three writers will give you a good basis in understanding what makes a great humorous story, but also makes a good story as well.
Karen?
Well, of course, Terry Pratchett and Robert Asprin. Robert Asprin was like my favorite. He's the person that dragged me into actually trying to get published. I'd been writing for years, but I started wanting to get published after that. But I would add to that list Christopher Stasheff.
Oh, I love.
Yes, I love
Yes.
Chris was an expert at situational humor. Take a character and drop them into a funny situation where they have to cope. And, you just can't leave him out of the list.
The Warlock in spite of himself.
The Warlock books,
great
loved
Spite of himself and that entire
We've got
series.
them all.
The Open on Venus,
He was good.
Amazing.
And Patricia, you were going to look up a name of an author there. Did you find it?
I did, and I have to second on everybody. Christopher Stasheff, Wizard in Spite of him, Warlock in Spite of Himself. I read through like 5 copies of that when I was in high school. I found one at our little PO newsstand, which was what served us as a bookstore back then in Butte, Montana. That was it. It had like 4 shelves of fantasy and science fiction, and that was my selection. And I hid it, and I found the 3rd book, and I couldn't find the 2nd book. I haunted used bookstores for years looking for the 2nd book before he revised it and brought it back out.
Wasn't that King Cobalt?
Yeah,
I think that was the second one. Yeah.
King Cobalt Revised is the one I read. I never did find a copy of King Cobalt. He said it was.
Wrote.
What's that?
I think I have 4 copies of everything he ever wrote, and none of them are signed, even though I have met him, and he passed away a while back.
About a year and a half ago.
Yes.
About a year and a half ago, he's a librarian.
He had
out west.
Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
But
Chris.
I was one thing I learned from Chris is never sit down with an author you care about and tell him what was wrong with your book, with his book.
Yeah.
I was poking fun at something he'd written in whatever the most recent book was.
Oh.
And what he did was he spent the next hour telling me the details of the one that was coming out. I don't like being told about the book before it comes out.
Then don't go anywhere near David.
Serves you right.
But anyway.
The author, now that we've built up all of this suspense, the author, I could not remember his name, is Patrick McManus.
Yes.
And I will dare anybody to read a Patrick McManus story out loud without laughing.
Sounds great.
I tried to do it to a high school class one time, and I think I got about 4 lines in. So yeah, and again, he does great characters. Chris Stasheff does great characters. Terry Pratchett does great characters. Jody and Robert Aspirin Jody Lanai and Robert Aspirin do great characters. I think that the way in which Terry and Patrick both used humor to point out they are critics of modern society, and they use humor to point out our foibles and things that maybe we should look at changing. And
in the kindest way possible.
In the kindest way possible. In the kindest way possible. And in many ways, most of my favorite Terry Pratchett stories are stories of redemption. And there was a person who was an optimist. And I think that, and I'm just babbling on because I just love him so much. Yeah, I'll stop.
We all miss Terry. All right.
I think he was our Shakespeare, really.
I will throw one more person out as a brilliant example of exceptional characters in almost everyday situations that become incredibly humor. Hunter Thompson.
Yes.
I mean, if you can read it, I mean, above and beyond the civic duty drive John Denver crazy for years. He wrote some of the greatest satirical characters set in society to make fun of society that you can read in your lifetime. So Hunter Thompson would be not in genre, but he's close enough to science fiction. You won't notice the difference with his attorneys and his car tires and everything else. Or to put it another way, he challenged Johnny Depp to play a character, and he could hardly keep up. All right, a final few minutes here. And we've talked about what they should read. We've talked a little about how they should write it. And at this point, I think maybe we should talk a little about what works as humor in the modern world. What do you do interacting, particularly Patricia, you do it, Karen, Jody. You've got you do scenes, urban fantasy that are contemporaneous, that are humor, or even your stories that aren't set in this time relate to this time. How does the modern world do you do anything in your humor? How does the modern world affect it? And we'll start with Patricia because I made her an example there.
Well, I think urban fantasy, that's part of the character of urban fantasy is to run with things that are happening in the real world, as sideline of the stories is commentary on what's going on. I try really hard to stay off soapboxes because I don't think that works. I try really hard not to tell people what to think because I think that doesn't work. I think that using humor to point out when there are other ways of looking at things is a very powerful tool. I think humor, like music, the genres of science fiction and fantasy themselves, I think all of those things are really good tools to get people to look at things from a different viewpoint, which is, of course, one of the points of writing fiction at all. I could not write the books that I'm writing right now if I lived in the 1950s. And the books that I'm writing right now, and Moon Call, which came out, I think, in 2005 or 2006, the things I was thinking about that my characters were worried about in 2005 are quite a bit different than they are now, because of the way the world has changed, or the way my viewpoint of the world has changed in 15 years, because I changed too. So I don't think it's, with urban fantasy, our modern world, the world that we live in, is really one of the characters involved.
Karen, how much does the contemporary plagues, wars, politicians, and other clowns affect what you're writing? Does it have an effect on your worlds and your characters?
It hasn't yet, but I'm certain it's about to, because I'm hoping to do a second theory book. As I pointed out, it's called You Can't Get There From Here. And there's a lot about the past year and a half that I think needs to be laughed at, and it's going to show up in that book. But like I said, it hasn't yet. This past year pretty much sucked.
We need to be a little more distant before it's funny.
Absolutely.
Too soon.
And I think that I need to, I'm planning to, I'm hoping to write something that will put it in its place, set it, recreate the setting so that it's not quite as tragic.
Okay, and taking off on that for a final question to you, Jody, besides one quickie. Humor as therapy, humor as relief.
Oh, always. It is the cheapest, the most available form of therapy for anybody is to make them laugh.
Laughter still the best medicine.
Totally agree with Patty that you can teach somebody something by putting it in a humorous vein. The great trial lawyer Melvin Ballai said, "Laughing juries never convict," because you present things to them in a way that if they'll laugh at it, they won't. They'll understand it better too, because they don't have that pressure, that concentration of, no, I won't listen to this. I won't believe in it. I won't understand it. But if you make them laugh, they relax and they become more receptive. So humor is wonderful for that. And I think that if you're going to tell a story about the modern day, if you can make people laugh about it, find something general, something universal that happened to everybody in this case, and perhaps if you were writing a fantasy story about what happened the last year and a half, that it was a good thing that we were all stuck in our houses because fill in the blank. That could be a thing. But humor is a wonderful thing. It's healthy. If you can get someone to laugh, they'll feel better. Their blood pressure will go down. So for that reason, I would promote humor for anyone.
Humor's better for your blood pressure than anger.
By far. I'm going to take advantage of my moderator job to have, and I'll excuse the phrase, the last laugh here, and thank Karen Bogen, Patricia Briggs, and Jody Lynn and I for this very insightful panel on the art and craft of writing humor. Thank you very much.
Thank you for
Thanks,
having us.
Bill.